Hey guys, hope you all had a good new year. So for today's video, I just wanted to cover something real quick that I've been meaning to cover for a while, but just got lost in the shuffle. And that was a claim made a little while back by a good buddy, the great Jordan Peterson. During an interview with presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, the topic of energy came up, specifically energy within the context of Europe. And Peter said something that perked up my ears right away.
Especially when you see what's happening now too, because I'm in Europe at the moment. I'm in the UK, which I guess counts as Europe, and they're facing a vicious winter, and so are the Germans. And the Swiss announced yesterday or the day before that they would put people in prison for up to 3 years if they turned their thermostats above, I can't remember if it was 66 degrees. 66 degrees. 3 years in jail.
Now, the moment that I heard that, I found it quite alarming. Despite being an authoritarian postmodern neo-Marxist, as Peterson would describe me, even I thought that such a policy, as Peterson described, would be very draconian, and one I wouldn't really be very inclined to support. The problem, however, as is usually the case with the good doctor, is that I found his comments to be highly questionable. So I decided to do the obvious thing and try to find out whether this policy that Peterson was fear-mongering about was actually, true. Spoiler alert, it wasn't at all. Try to contain your shock. So here's what happened. First off, as you might expect, I began my detective work using the old Google machine and typed in something to the effect of Switzerland 66 degrees jail time. Nothing fancy. And immediately, I had gotten a bevy of nearly all right-wing websites in the search results. Uh-oh, that's not usually a good sign. If only conservative outlets are reporting on something, 9 times out of 10, that either means that they're all getting worked up because they're blatantly misinterpreting something, or just outright lying about something. But fortunately, in that sea of right-wing garbage, I did find one seemingly legit outlet, a Swiss website called Swiss Info, which published an article with the very helpful title called Fact Check: Will the Swiss be jailed for heating their homes above 19 degrees Celsius? So here's what they had to say. It starts off with the concerned reader asking whether the rumor of being jailed were true. Like many other countries, Switzerland is preparing for possible energy shortages once the colder months set in. One proposal announced by officials in Bern at the end of August on what to do in case of a severe shortage of natural gas has spawned a rumor that has circulated around the world. There is this weird story going around that Switzerland is going to fine and even send people to jail if they heat their homes more than 19 degrees Celsius. Swiss Info reader Danny wrote. Is this true? So the article then breaks down exactly how the rumor started. Danny sent along links to articles by various outlets abroad, claiming that Swiss authorities would issue fines as hefty as 3,000 Swiss francs, or $3,145, or jail time of up to 3 years if residents broke a new rule obliging them to cap their indoor temperature at 19 degrees Celsius. Many of the outlets had sourced this information from the Swiss tabloid Blick, which on September 6th published a story that opens with the lines, "In an emergency, the rule is to heat less, and energy rule breakers should be afraid. Violations of the gas ordinance can result in prison sentences and fines." So right off the bat, this story came from a sensationalist news site. Let's continue. Marcus Sporndly, apologies for mangling that, a spokesperson for the Department of Economic Affairs, Education and Research, who is quoted in Blick, told SWI that the story had been misunderstood or incorrectly interpreted by some. As Sporndly was quick to point out, no one in the country is at risk of receiving a penalty for cranking up the heat in their home. There is currently no shortage of electricity or natural gas in Switzerland, he wrote in an email. There are therefore no restrictions or bans on energy usage in force that could be violated. The gas ordinance Blick mentioned is actually part of a 4-step plan that Bern is proposing to deal with the gas shortage, which officials have said cannot be ruled out this winter given the geopolitical situation. This draft ordinance has been sent out for consultation. Stakeholders have until September 22nd to share their views. Okay, so this policy doesn't actually exist. But some of you might say, but the mere fact that the Swiss government is even discussing the possibility of such a thing is terrifying enough already. Well, let's continue further. If the government ever decides to go ahead with this plan, the limit on heating would not necessarily be implemented right away, if at all. That's because measures taken would depend on the severity of the situation. The first step would be to urge people to reduce their consumption, such as by turning down the thermostat. Only if things do not improve would authorities move to the third step, which includes obliging consumers, starting with public buildings and offices, and then, if necessary, households, to cap heating at 19 degrees Celsius. This rule would apply only to places heated by gas-powered systems. Households consume more than 40% of the natural gas in Switzerland, according to the government, so this restriction could have an impact on overall consumption. Compliance is therefore an important matter. In theory, penalties are possible in the event of a severe gas shortage. The National Economic Supply Act, which would serve as the legal basis for the proposed ordinance, sets out fines ranging from 30 Swiss francs to 3,000 Swiss francs per day in case of breaches. However, as Sporndly explained, the process of issuing such fines would be cumbersome. Authorities would have to look at each case individually, as the penalties under the Act are not administrative fines of the kind that the police can simply issue, such as for traffic violations. Pursuing violations under the NESA would therefore be complicated. In any case, strict checks are neither feasible nor desirable. If authorities ever did issue such a fine to someone breaking a rule on heating, a judge could consider 30 Swiss francs reasonable, but a 3,000 Swiss franc fine would not be seen as proportionate to the crime, said Sporndly. As for jail time, while it is also theoretically possible under the NESA, a judge is not likely to consider that proportionate either. If a restriction on heating homes ever came into effect, the spokesperson said the likely scenario is that most people would follow it, just as most people complied with measures like social distancing or working from home at the height of COVID-19. In Switzerland, we trust people to abide by the law. And so the article wraps up with providing the verdict, a big fat false. The Swiss authorities are not fining or jailing people for heating their homes above 19 degrees, since there is currently no gas shortage or restriction on heating. A proposed ordinance to introduce such a restriction is still under consultation. It would take effect only in case of severe natural gas shortage. Fines are in theory possible, but would be difficult for authorities to issue. Jail time would be highly unlikely. So there you have it. I know, as shocking as it may seem, Jordan Peterson was hilariously wrong about something yet again. Though some of you may still be saying, okay, fine, maybe it's not as bad as Peterson claimed, but even in your so-called fact check, they didn't completely rule out the possibility of prison time, even if the odds are very highly unlikely. Okay, I guess this is a point that's probably worth addressing just to wrap everything up. Now, admittedly, this is just speculation on my part, but I assume the reason why they didn't fully rule out the possibility of prison might be because of a case involving, perhaps, a repeat offender. If courts are to dole out punishment for raising the thermostat temperature, I would assume that they'd settle for offering small fines, like the ones mentioned at 30 Swiss francs, and not make too much of a big deal about it otherwise. But what if you have somebody, probably like Peterson, who would attempt to openly defy such a regulation, and assume that such a person would keep violating it, and keep doing so despite the ever-increasing amounts of fines they would be racking up?
Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that.
If a judge sees the same dipshit like 8 or 9 times, and they haven't learned a goddamn thing, then maybe by that point, they probably will be like, alright, we tried everything else, and this maroon just won't cooperate. So I guess it wouldn't hurt to have them spend a little bit of time in the joint, if that's what they really want. Now again, to be clear, that's just speculation on my part. But that is how a lot of our laws tend to operate, particularly in the US. You can theoretically go to jail by refusing to pay for your parking ticket, for example. But nobody would be dumb enough to say that parking violations themselves result in jail time. But of course, no doubt you Jordan Peterson fans have one final, albeit well-worn and cliché defense. For you see, the great Jordan Peterson cannot be wrong. He can only be wronged. No doubt a soy boy like you has taken the man completely out of context, because Jordan Peterson is, as he always says, very careful with his words. So there's no possible way that he could be this badly incorrect on such a topic. Well, I suppose it's fair to point out that the original clip that I showed at the beginning of this video wasn't something that I personally clipped. I actually got this off another YouTube channel where this clip was isolated from. But before you commence with the victory dance, I sought out the original full-length interview, and sadly for you guys and Peterson, there is no magical missing context here that makes Peterson's grossly exaggerated comments remotely salvageable. Not that I imagine it's going to make any bit of difference to the lobster crowd, but I'll go ahead and I'll link the original full interview with the timestamp, and you guys can judge for yourself. But no, he just lies. A lot. Or being incredibly generous. He's too lazy to check to see if any of his unhinged fever dreams are in fact true or not. Either way, not exactly a good look for the Western Hemisphere's top intellectual. Anyway, so to summarize, the tyrannical policy that Peterson is worried about doesn't actually exist, but might exist at some point in the future, though not in the form Peterson is talking about, only under extreme circumstances, which aren't the case right now, and would punish people within reason and proportionality, which would mainly include small fines with the possibility of actual imprisonment being virtually non-existent. But yeah, other than that, he was spot on, as usual. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Once again, if you like my content, please like and subscribe to my channel, and if you could, I'd really appreciate any donations to my Patreon. Thanks again, and I'll see you real soon.